My name is Danielle Carver, and I was 36 the year my family taught me what they thought a life was worth. I was standing in the cemetery, boots in the wet grass, 2 fresh plots in front of me when the phone started buzzing in my coat. My husband Tom was in one. My daughter Lily was 6. She was in the other. My parents and my brother had skipped the burial entirely. They called it a trivial event not worth attending. Then flew to Hawaii together the very next morning. 5 days after I buried my whole world, my mother called not to grieve with me, to ask for money. And what she said next is the reason I will never call her mom again. Welcome back to CalmDramaStories, where ordinary women face impossible families and answer with quiet strength instead of noise. If a story ever made you feel a little less alone, you're in the right place. So pull up a chair, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe because this one starts at the worst week of my life and ends somewhere I never expected. These days I wake at 4. The house is dark behind me when I cross the gravel. And I don't turn the kitchen light on anymore because there's no one in there to see it. The first thing I touch every morning is cold metal. My rig keys, they warm up in my hand by the time I reach the lot, and the cab smells like diesel and old coffee. And for about 20 minutes before the sun comes up, that smell is the only thing that feels like mine. I drove long haul for 11 years before any of this. Men at the truck stops used to assume the owner was my husband, and I used to let them because it was easier than explaining. Tom thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He'd order pie and watch some dispatcher hand me a clipboard meant for him and he'd wait, grinning for the moment the man realized the boss was the woman with grease under her nails. I keep his coffee mug in the cab still. I don't drink from it. I just like knowing it's there riding shotgun the way he used to. People think grief is loud. Mostly it's just a lot of smalls where you reach for someone and your hand closes on nothing. By the cabin door, there are still 2 pairs of small rubber boots, yellow, lined up where Lily left them. I haven't moved them. I tell myself I will. And then another 4 o'clock comes and I don't. 11 months ago, I still had a family to come home to. I want to tell you how I lost them. But first, I have to tell you how the people who shared my blood decided they had somewhere better to be. It rained for 3 days that spring. The kind of rain that turns a creek into a wall of water in 20 minutes. I was 500 miles east on a refrigerated run, hauling produce I no longer remember when my phone lit up at a fuel island in Ohio. Tom had picked Lily up from her grandmother's early because of the weather. He was a careful man, 20 years behind the wheel, never a ticket, the kind who slowed down for yellow lights when the truck behind him laid on the horn. He took the county road home because the highway was flooding. There's a low water crossing out past the Henley farm. A little concrete dip where the creek runs under the road. On a dry day you'd never think about it. That day, the water came up over the crossing while they were on it. They found his truck a /4 mile downstream, wedged against the cottonwoods. 2 days later, after the water finally dropped. I'm not going to describe the rest. Some things aren't for telling, and Lily was 6, and she deserves better than to be a sad detail in a story. What I'll tell you is that I drove home in 9 hours flat, no sleep, both hands shaking on the wheel, doing math the whole way. If I'd turned down that run, if I'd been home to drive them myself, if I'd taught Tom to fear that crossing the way I did, I got back to a town that already knew before I did. Casseroles on my porch, the sheriff's truck in my drive. I was 9 hours fast across 4 states. I was still 9 hours too late. And the first call I made before I could even get the words out was to my mother. I thought of everyone on this earth, she would come. My mother's first question was whether the funeral could wait 2 weeks. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor with the phone, thinking I'd misheard her. She and my father had a trip planned. She said, Hawaii, 8 days with my brother Nathan and his wife Mallory and the grandkids. It had been on the calendar since January. The deposits were paid. I told her my husband and my daughter were dead. She told me she understood that in the tone you'd use for a coworker who'd missed a deadline. Then Mallory took over the family group text because Mallory always takes over. She wrote that, of course, everyone was so sorry, but the tickets were non-refundable, and the children had been looking forward to this. And surely I wouldn't want them to cancel the whole vacation over what she actually typed out in writing for all of us to read. A trivial event not worth attending. I read that line 4 times. A trivial event, my daughter's funeral. My mother's reply 2 minutes later. was a thumbs up and the word agreed. Not one of them asked how Lily died. Not one of them asked Tom's middle name for the headstone, or whether I was eating, or whether I was alone in that house with 2 pairs of yellow boots by the door. They asked which week worked better for them. I stopped asking. I told them the burial would be Saturday and they were welcome or not. And then I hung up and I did not call again. That was the first time in my life I understood something cold and clean about the people who raised me. They weren't going to choose me. They had never once in 36 years chosen me. And the strange thing was knowing it didn't break me. It freed up my hands for what came next. The front pew is reserved for family. At Tom and Lily's service, the front pew was empty, and I made the choice to sit in the second row with everyone else because the people in the second row had actually come. My Uncle Ernest drove 4 hours from Joplin and stood next to me the whole time with his hand on my shoulder like a man holding a fence post in a storm. The church filled up. Tom's dispatchers came in their work shirts. The diner ladies came. Lily's kindergarten teacher came and cried harder than I did. And the whole soccer team showed up in their little blue jerseys because Tom had coached them on Saturdays. My parents were on a beach. My brother was on a beach. Their seats stayed empty and clean while 100 working people packed in shoulder to say goodbye to a truck driver and a little girl. I gave the eulogy myself. I didn't trust my voice to anyone else's hands. I said Tom slowed down for yellow lights. I said Lily drew trucks instead of princesses. I said they were the best thing I ever built and the only thing I couldn't keep. I did not mention the empty pew and I didn't have to because every soul in that room could see it. Afterward, Ernest walked me to my car and said the only honest thing anyone in my family said that whole month. Danielle, they're not coming back to you. Not really. You should plan your life like that's true. I buried my husband and my daughter with the people who actually showed up. And as I stood by the 2 fresh plots, gravel under my boots, the phone in my coat started to buzz. My mother's name from Honolulu. I let it ring out into the wet grass and I had no idea yet what she was about to ask me for. 5 days later, she got me on the phone because I finally answered out of pure exhaustion. There was no "how are you?" There was no "I'm sorry I missed it." There was wind and an airport announcement in the background and my mother's voice going straight to business like a woman calling about a late invoice. Danielle, we need to talk about the money. I sat down. I asked what money. She said the $40,000. Her tone said I should already know. Then she told me Nathan's dealership was in trouble, that the family needed to pull together, that I had to understand the bigger picture. And when I didn't answer fast enough, she said the line I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. We can always make more money, Danielle. We can't make more family. She said it to me, to the daughter whose family was in the ground, because they wouldn't fly home. She said it from the Honolulu airport with sand probably still in her shoes, asking me for $40,000 to save the son who'd been lying on a beach while my little girl went into the earth. I held the phone away from my face and looked at the 2 pairs of yellow boots by the door. I thought about how a person can use the most beautiful word in the language, family, as a crowbar to pry money out of someone they just abandoned. I came very close to laughing and very close to something worse. Instead, I asked her one quiet question. What $40,000 do you think is yours? There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that tells you someone has already decided what they're entitled to and just hasn't said it out loud yet. And in that pause, I started to understand exactly what they thought they were owed and exactly how wrong they were. Here's the $40,000. For years back, before any of this, I wanted to stop driving other people's freight and buy a good used tractor. Ran me about 90 grand. I'd saved most of it the hard way, but I was short and Tom and I needed a bank loan to close the gap. The lender looked at my down payment and asked where 40,000 of it came from because that's what lenders do. It had come from my parents years earlier. They'd handed it to me in front of Nathan at a Christmas where they were feeling generous and important, and they'd called it a gift toward my future. The bank doesn't take your word for that. When part of a down payment comes from relatives, the lender makes the relatives sign a letter. It's a real document. It states the money is a true gift, that no repayment is expected, that it isn't a loan and never was. I didn't think twice about it then. I drove the paperwork over to my parents' house myself, sat at their kitchen table, and watched my mother and father each put their signature on that letter so I could buy my truck. Then I filed it away with my loan documents and forgot it existed. The way you forget a thing you'll never need until the day you need it more than anything you own. My mother had forgotten it too. Or she decided it didn't count anymore because now 4 years later with Nathan sinking, and my whole life buried in the cemetery, she'd reclassified that gift in her head. It wasn't a gift now. Now it was an investment. And an investment she figured was something a family could demand back whenever it pleased. She had no idea what was sitting in my filing cabinet. Nathan called the next day to finish what my mother started. My brother is 33 and has spent his whole life being the responsible one, which mostly meant being the one my parents bankrolled. He'd opened a car dealership 2 years back with money he didn't really have, and now the floor plan loans were eating him alive, and the lot was full of trucks nobody was buying. He didn't ask about Lily either. He led with the dealership, then with the family, then with the part that told me everything. "Look, Danielle, you're alone now," he said. "What do you even need it for?" I let that sit in the air. You're alone now. As if my husband and daughter were a budget line they'd helpfully zeroed out for me. As if grief came with a refund. Then Ivory texted because Ivory cannot let a silence stand. She wrote that family money was a shared pool that I'd taken from the pool once, and it was someone else's turn now, and that frankly my attitude was hurting everyone. Shared pool. I'd repaid my parents' generosity 100 ways over the years, but you can't repay people who keep moving the line. The worst part wasn't the asking. The worst part was learning from a cousin a week later that they'd already been telling the whole extended family their version. That poor Nathan was struggling and selfish Danielle, sitting on her trucks, wouldn't lift a finger to help her own blood. They'd built the story before I even said no. They just needed me to play the villain in it. I decided right then I wasn't going to argue with their story. I was going to outlast it. I want to tell you I never wavered. I'd be lying. There's a thing I do, a thing a lot of you do, where I'd rather carry the whole weight myself than make a scene. I've been the one everyone leans on since I was 9 years old, packing Nathan's lunches because our mother was tired. So one night, a week into the calls, I actually sat down with my checkbook. $40,000 would empty my cushion, but it would make the phone stop ringing. And some exhausted animal part of me just wanted the noise to end. Ernest caught me at it. He'd taken to dropping by, fixing things that didn't need fixing, sitting in Tom's chair so it wouldn't be so empty. He saw the checkbook open on the table, and he didn't yell. He just said, "You'd really write that, wouldn't you? You'd pay them to keep skipping your funerals." And I put the pen down because he was right. I wasn't scared of being called ungrateful. I was just so used to being the one who fixed things that I'd almost fixed the wrong thing. If you've ever been the person everyone leans on and nobody catches, stay with me, because this is the exact part where I stopped carrying people who couldn't be bothered to stand at my daughter's grave. Drop a comment if you've been that person and subscribe, because what I did instead of writing that check is the whole reason I'm telling you this. I capped the pen, closed the book, and the next morning at 4, I did the one thing that has never once let me down. I went to work. Going back to work meant facing every man who thought I'd fold without Tom. The bank officer who held my line of credit asked in a kind voice that was somehow worse than rudeness whether I'd considered selling the equipment while it still had value. A freight broker I'd worked with for years suddenly had doubts about whether the outfit could keep running given everything. I heard third hand that 2 of them were telling shippers I wouldn't last the season. A grieving widow with a couple of trucks. They'd already counted me out. My keys were cold in my hand every morning, and some mornings that cold was the only thing keeping me upright. But I held on to them like they were the last thing in the world that was actually mine, because they were. Then Glenda found me. Glenda's pushing 60, ran dispatch for a regional carrier for 30 years, and has forgotten more about freight than those brokers will ever learn. She took me to a truck stop, bought me eggs, and gave me the only business advice that mattered. "Honey," she said, "from here out, people are either working with you or they're working against you. There is no third chair. Stop hoping the doubters come around. Make them irrelevant." So I did. I called every shipper who'd ever trusted Tom, and I told them the truth flat out. The owner was the woman with grease under her nails, the same as always. And she was still on time. I undercut nobody and outworked everybody. And about 3 weeks into that, a contract came across my desk that was too big for 2 trucks. A regional grocery chain, steady freight, real money, the kind of account that builds a company. All I had to do was be brave enough to take it. To take that contract, I needed a second tractor on the road fast. So I started cleaning out Tom's old rig to sell it and free up cash. That truck was his heart. He'd kept it spotless. Oil logs to the day. A little plastic horse lily glued to the dash. So Daddy has a friend. I sat in that cab for an hour before I could touch anything. Then I started pulling his things, gentle like sorting through a sleeping man's pockets, his sunglasses, a church bulletin, a roll of quarters for the air machine, and down in the door pocket under a folded map, his logbook. Not the electronic kind the law requires now. The old paper kind he kept anyway out of habit. 20 years of his life in pencil, every run, every mile in his careful block letters. I held it and couldn't open it. It felt like opening his hands. I told myself I'd read it later when I was stronger. And I set it on the passenger seat next to his coffee mug and the little plastic horse. But I'd seen something as I picked it up. The last page wasn't a run. It was writing. More of it than a log. Entry, his handwriting filling the lines. He'd written something there before he died, and I hadn't known. And now it was sitting 2 feet away from me, waiting. I drove home with it on the seat like a passenger. I want to be honest with you. I was afraid of that page. Some part of me already knew that whatever Tom wrote on it was going to change what I did next, and I wasn't sure I was ready to be changed. It took me 3 more days to open it. While that logbook sat unopened on my kitchen table, my family went to work on my name. Ivory ran the campaign because Ivory treats family like a marketing account. The texts came daily, reminders of everything my parents had done for me. A guilt trip dressed as concern, asking if I'd gotten help for how bitter I'd become. She forwarded me a photo of Nathan's kids, captioned with a line about how they might lose their house, as if their house and my dead daughter belonged on the same scale. And she worked the relatives hard. My cousin Renee called and told me what was circulating, that I'd come into money and turn my back on the family, that grief had made me cruel, that my parents were heartbroken by my coldness, the same parents who'd been snorkeling while I picked out a child-sized casket. They'd flipped it completely. In their telling, they were the wounded ones, and I was the villain who wouldn't help her struggling brother. For about a day it made me sick because a lie repeated by enough mouths starts to feel like weather, like something you just have to live under. Then it made me clear. They weren't going to stop on their own. People who rewrite the story to make themselves the victim never volunteer to put the pen down. Renee, to her credit, wasn't buying it. I was at that funeral, Danny, she said. I saw the empty pew. I'm not crazy. That was the first crack. One person in that family who'd looked at the same room I had and seen the truth of it. I didn't know yet how much I'd need her, but I filed it away next to the gift letter, next to the logbook, in the growing folder of things that were going to matter. Renee called again on a Thursday and her voice was different. Lower, the voice people use when they're telling you something they're not supposed to. They're planning something, she said. At the anniversary, my parents' 40th wedding anniversary was coming up. A big party at the church hall. The whole extended family invited. I hadn't planned to go, but Renee had been at my aunt's kitchen table when my mother and Mallory mapped it out. They were going to corner me there in front of everyone. Ray, my father, was going to stand up during the toasts and make a family appeal, put me on the spot publicly, frame it as the prodigal daughter refusing to help her family in their hour of need. They figured I'd either cave under the pressure of 40 relatives watching, or refuse, and prove I was exactly the cold woman they'd been describing. Either way they won. It was a trap with 2 exits, and both of them led where they wanted me to go. Renee thought I should skip it. Stay home. Stay safe. Don't give them the stage. And for a minute, that's what I figured I'd do. Then something in me went very still and very calm. The way it does on a mountain grade when the brakes start to fade and you stop being scared and just start driving. They wanted an audience. 40 people, the whole family, gathered in one room to watch them put me in my place. The thing about an audience, though, is that it works both ways. They were building a stage to humiliate me on. I started thinking about what else you could do with a stage and a room full of witnesses, and the truth nobody had bothered to check. That night, I finally opened the last page of Tom's logbook. I poured a coffee I didn't drink and I sat at the table and I turned to the back and there it was. His block handwriting dated the week before he died. It wasn't a love letter. Tom wasn't a love letter man. It was a list. He titled it the way he titled everything. Plain and direct. Things we're going to do. Buy our own rig. Paid off. No bank. Get our name on the door, not somebody else's. And then the line that took the floor out from under me. Carver and daughter. So Lily grows up knowing her mama built something. He'd written our company name. The company we always talked about and never quite started. He'd already picked it. Carver and daughter for the little girl, who drew trucks instead of princesses, so she'd grow up watching her mother run something with her own name on it. I sat there a long time. Then I reached up to the visor of his cab the next morning where I knew she kept her artwork. And I unclipped the drawing that had been writing there for 2 years. Lily's crayon picture. 3 lumpy trucks in a row. A stick figure with yellow hair beside them and her careful kindergarten letters underneath. Mama's trucks. I'd seen it 100 times and never really seen it. They'd called her funeral a trivial event. They'd called my whole life a budget line. And I was about to make that little girl's name worth more than their entire vacation. I didn't decide it in a rush of anger. I decided it the way you decide to take a long grade in a lower gear on purpose with both eyes open. The next week, I filed the paperwork. The company stopped being Danielle Carver, owner-operator. It became Carver and Daughter Freight. I kept the and daughter. She was gone and I kept it anyway because some names you earn by loving someone, not by keeping them. Naming the company changed something in how I moved. I wasn't grieving and waiting for the storm to pass anymore. I had a thing to build and a daughter's name on the door, and people who'd lied about both. I decided I would go to the anniversary party, not to fight. I've never won anything by being the loudest person in a room. And I wasn't about to start at my parents' party. I'd go for one reason. To put the truth on the table in front of every witness they'd gathered and let it sit there where they couldn't text it away or spin it on a phone call. But truth in that family was never enough by itself. They'd been bending it my whole life. I needed something they couldn't argue with, something with their own names on it. And I remembered the gift letter for years filed away, sitting in my cabinet with the loan documents, signed by both of them, swearing in plain language that the $40,000 was a gift and not a loan. The trouble was, I wasn't sure I still had my copy clean and legible, and I knew the original lived in my bank's loan file. If I was going to set that page down in front of 40 people, it had to be real, official, undeniable. So I did the unglamorous thing. I called my bank and asked how a borrower gets a certified copy of a document from her own closed loan file. The woman on the phone said it would take a few days and a small fee. A few days. And a small fee. That was the whole price of the thing that was going to turn their faces to paper. I marked the date of the party on the calendar and I started counting down, not in dread now, but in readiness. The loan officer who pulled my file was younger than my closing had been, but he found it. I sat across the desk from him while he flipped through 4-year-old paperwork, and he slid one page across to me, and there they were, my mother's signature, my father's signature. Above them, the language banks use, so there's never any doubt. The funds represent a gift. No repayment is expected. This is not a loan in any form. Both of them had signed it at their own kitchen table while I watched. I had the officer make a certified copy, stamped and dated, and I drove it home flat on the passenger seat like it might blow away. The whole drive I kept hearing, "Nathan, you're alone now, Danielle. What do you even need it for?" I knew now exactly what I needed it for, not the money. I'd never see that $40,000 and didn't want it. I needed the one page that proved which of us had been telling the truth. And I needed it in front of the people they'd lied to. I wasn't building a case to scream. I was building a case so I could stay calm while they didn't. That's the part nobody tells you about getting even the right way. The strongest thing in the room is never the loudest voice. It's the quiet person with the document. If anyone in your life has ever made you doubt what you plainly remember, here's what 11 years of paperwork taught me. Write it down. Keep the page. File the proof. Subscribe because the next part is the one I waited 11 months for. I put the certified copy in a plain folder, set it by the door next to my keys, and I waited for Saturday. While I waited, the company grew. I took that grocery contract and to cover it I bought a second tractor, then leased a third when the freight kept coming. I had drivers now, real ones, good ones, men and one woman who'd left bigger outfits because I paid fair and didn't lie. We painted the trucks deep green with the name in clean white letters down both doors, the same on every rig, Carver and Daughter Freight, and under it, small, where you'd only notice if you looked, I had them paint Lily's 3 lumpy crayon trucks traced exact from her drawing. The first time I saw all 3 rigs lined up at the yard with her artwork on the doors, I had to sit in my truck a while. That broker who doubted I'd last the season called to ask if I had capacity for his overflow. The bank officer who'd suggested I sell quietly upgraded my credit line without my asking. Funny how fast she'll never make it turns into we've always believed in you once the trucks are moving and the invoice is clear. I didn't gloat. I just remembered. Word of all this traveled the way it does in a small town, and it traveled straight to my family. Suddenly, the daughter who was alone now and didn't need her money was running a real company with her name on 3 trucks. They could smell it. The same people who skipped the funeral started liking my posts. My mother sent a single text, the first warm thing in months. We're so proud of what you've built, honey. So proud of the thing they tried to take $40,000 out of. I didn't answer. I just made sure that certified copy was still sitting by the door, and I counted down the days. The closer the party got, the louder my mother's version got. She'd stopped expecting the check and started protecting her story, which mattered more to her than the money ever had. At the church, at the beauty shop, at her sister's table. She told anyone who'd hold still that Danielle had abandoned the family, that success had gone to my head, that I'd let one tragedy, her words, one tragedy, turn me bitter against my own blood. And she kept reaching for that same line. The one she'd used to ask for the money, except now she aimed it at me. We can't make more family, she'd say, shaking her head sorrowful, as if I were the one who'd flown to Hawaii. As if I'd been the one to call a child's funeral a trivial event. She'd weaponized the most beautiful word she knew, and she'd turned it around until I was the villain holding it. I heard all this from Renee, who'd appointed herself my spy and my friend in the same breath. And Renee did something I'll never forget. She started quietly telling people the truth, not arguing, not making scenes. Just when someone repeated my mother's version at the grocery store, Renee would say, "Mild as milk." That's strange because I was at the funeral. And Brenda and Ray weren't. They were in Hawaii. I have the dates. And she did have the dates. People started doing the math. A few of them went quiet about it. The way you do when a story you've been repeating turns out to be the opposite of true. The ground was shifting under my mother's feet, and she didn't even feel it yet. She thought she was walking into her anniversary party to put her daughter in her place. She had no idea the place had already moved. The thing that really cracked it open was a photograph. My mother, like a lot of people her age, had discovered that she loved posting pictures online and hated understanding how the dates worked. Somewhere in her feed from that spring was a sunny shot of the whole crew of them. Lees around their necks, mateys in hand, my brother's kids grinning in the surf. The caption was about making memories. The timestamp was the day after Tom and Lily went into the ground. Renee found it. She didn't even have to say anything cruel. She just put that photo next to the funeral date, both of them plain as day, and let people look. A Lays and Cocktails beach photo dated the morning after a 6-year-old's burial. You can spin a lot of things with a phone call. You cannot spin a timestamp. The relatives who'd been nodding along to my mother's story now had a date in one hand and a date in the other. And the gap between them was an ocean and a child's grave. Some of them came to me awkward and sorry, saying they hadn't known. Saying my mother had told them I never even invited them, which was its own lie. I didn't rub anyone's face in it. I just said gently that the funeral had been open to everyone who wanted to come, and that I'd been grateful for the ones who did, cool and even, save the heat for people who deserved to feel it. Because the photo had done in one timestamp what I'd never have managed with 100 angry words. It had turned the witnesses my parents were gathering into witnesses for me. And the party was 4 days out. For days out. I did something I hadn't been able to make myself do in 11 months. I drove out to the lake. Not the crossing. I'll never go back to the crossing. But the lake upstream where Tom used to take Lily to skip rocks on Sunday mornings while I caught up on sleep. I went at dawn because that's when the water goes flat and silver and still. No wind like a held breath. I'd been avoiding it the way you avoid a sore tooth. Sure that standing there would break me clean in half. It didn't. I sat on the bank with my coffee, the real cup, not Tom's. And I talked to them a while. I told Lily about the trucks with her drawing on the doors. I told Tom I'd named the company. I told them what I was about to do, and I asked them out loud whether I was doing it for the right reason. And sitting there in the quiet, I got my answer. I didn't want my parents ruined. I didn't want Nathan's kids to lose their house. I'm not built to enjoy other people's wreckage, even theirs. What I wanted was simpler and harder. I wanted it on the record. I wanted 40 people to know what was true, so that the next time my mother called my daughter's death a trivial event, there'd be a room full of folks who knew better. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to stop being optional. Turns out for people like my family, those two things feel exactly the same. And I'd stopped being responsible for how the truth made them feel. The water stayed flat and silver. For the first time, standing there didn't break me. It set me level. The night before the party, Ernest came by. He had heard what was coming. The way everyone in a family eventually hears everything. And he offered to stand up with me, to be in the room, to back me, to make sure I wasn't alone against all of them. It was a good and loving offer, and I told him no. Not because I didn't want him there, because I'd finally understood that I didn't need a shield. A shield is for someone who's about to lose. I wasn't going in to lose. I was going in with the truth and one certified page and the calmest hands I'd had in a year. Ernest, I said. If I bring a bodyguard, it looks like a fight. I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to tell 40 people something true, and then I'm going to leave. He looked at me a long moment. Then he nodded the way he had at the funeral, like a man who knew when to hold the fence post and when to let it stand on its own. Your daddy never had your spine, he said. Neither did your brother. I took that as the compliment it was. After he left, I laid out my clothes for the next day, plain and dark, nothing fancy, because I wasn't dressing to win anybody over. I put the certified copy of the gift letter in my coat pocket. One folded page, and I set the coat by the door. 40 years of marriage, $40,000 they wanted back, and I was bringing exactly one page to the party. I slept better that night than I had since the funeral. When you finally know what you're going to do, the fear has nowhere left to live. The church hall smelled like coffee and carnations and 40 years of potluck. They'd done it up. Nice. A long table with a white cloth, a sheet cake with my parents' wedding photo printed on it in sugar, a banner that said 40 years in gold letters, about 40 relatives, which I noted with some grim amusement. 40 years, $40,000, 40 people to watch. My mother saw me come in, and her face did a complicated thing. Surprise and triumph at once, because she hadn't been sure I'd show. And now that I had, she thought I'd walked into her trap. Mallory air kissed me. Nathan wouldn't meet my eyes. I got a paper plate of cake I didn't eat. And I waited because I knew what was coming. And a calm settles over you when you're the only person in the room who knows the script. They got through the toasts. Then my father stood up, tapped his fork against his glass, and the room went quiet for him. And I watched him decide to do it in front of everyone. He thanked them all for coming. He talked about family, about sticking together, about how times got hard and family was supposed to step up. And then he turned slow, deliberate to me. Some of us, he said, have been blessed and have forgotten where the blessing came from. We helped Danielle when she had nothing, $40,000, and now that she's done well, she won't lift a finger for her own brother. A murmur went through the hall. Mallory right on cue added her line. Sweet as poison. Just loud enough. It's a shame. We even missed that funeral for family. And this is the thanks. A trivial event. She'd actually called it that again in different words in front of everyone. The room turned to look at me. My mother sat with her hands folded, certain she'd won. And I sat down my paper plate and I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. That's the first thing I want you to know, because it's the thing that mattered most. 40 people were braced for a scene, and I gave them quiet instead. And quiet in a loud room is the loudest thing there is. Dad, I said, you're right that you gave me $40,000. Let's talk about that. But first, let's talk about the funeral since Mallory brought it up. I reached into my coat and I took out a single sheet of paper, and I unfolded it slow and I laid it flat on the white tablecloth next to the wedding cake. It was a printed timeline, plain dates. This is the day my husband and my daughter were buried, I said, and I pointed. And this, I moved my finger an inch, is the date on the beach photo Mom posted. One day later, Lace Cocktails Making Memories, the caption said. I looked up. You didn't miss the funeral for family. You skipped a child's funeral for a vacation, and then you flew home and asked the grieving mother for $40,000. The room had gone very still. My father's mouth opened and shut. My mother's certainty was draining out of her face like water out of a sink. And then Nathan did what loud people always do when the quiet person won't flinch. He exploded. He came up out of his chair red-faced, shouting that I was twisting things, that the dealership was failing, that I owed this family, that I was selfish, alone, bitter, all of it. The whole script at top volume in a church hall. I let him finish. When he ran out of breath, I reached into my coat one more time, and I took out the second page, the certified copy, and I set it down next to the timeline, and I slid it across the cloth toward my father. You both signed this, I said, 4 years ago at your kitchen table. It's the gift letter the bank required. It says in your own signatures that the $40,000 was a gift. No repayment expected, not a loan in any form. I let that sit. So, a demand to pay it back as a debt doesn't hold up. You can ask me for money. You can't bill me for a gift you swore wasn't one. Then I said the 3 things I'd come to say. And I said them gentle because they didn't need any force behind them. To Mallory, you taught me which events are worth attending. I'll remember that. The rest of my life. To my mother who'd gone white. You told me we can't make more family. You were right. So, I've stopped trying to make one out of you. And to Nathan, still standing there, fists open now. You asked what I even needed it for. I needed it to bury my daughter. You needed Hawaii. Nobody spoke. Then a chair scraped at the back of the hall and Renee stood up and said, clear as a bell. I was at that funeral. Everything she just said is true. I have the dates. After Renee, the room turned the way a heavy truck turns slow, and then all at once, an aunt I'd barely spoken to in years reached over and quietly moved the gift letter so more people could read it. Folks who'd come ready to judge the cold, ungrateful daughter were now looking at a timeline and 2 signatures and a beach photo, and doing the only honest thing left, which was to look ashamed of what they'd believed. My mother said my name once, Danielle, like a question. Like she still thought there was a version of this where I sat back down and we had cake. There wasn't. And Nathan, my brother, the loud one, ran all the way out of steam and just stood there. And for 1 second I saw it. The real thing under all the entitlement. He was terrified. He was going to lose the dealership and maybe the house, and his kids would feel it. And he'd gambled the whole family on bullying me into covering it. And now the family was looking at him instead. Danny, he said, quiet for the first time. I'm scared. And I believed him. That was the closest thing to honest any of them had offered me in 11 months. And I felt the old reflex twitch, the one that's packed his lunches since he was a baby. But he still hadn't said he was sorry about Lily. Not once. Not her name, not that day, not the empty pew. Scared for himself, never sorry for me. So I picked up my 2 pages and I folded them back into my coat, and I said the truest thing I had left. I hope you figure it out, Nathan. I really do, but you're going to have to figure it out without me. Then I walked out into the parking lot, and the air was clean and cold and I could breathe. The story that I owed them $40,000 died in that hall and never came back. They could have asked me for help the way anybody can ask anybody. What they couldn't do after their own signatures sat on that tablecloth was keep calling it a debt I'd walked out on. You can't collect on a gift the giver swore was a gift. And the relatives who'd been ready to chip in for Nathan's repayment quietly closed their checkbooks once they'd seen the dates. The dealership folded that fall. I heard about it the way I hear about all of them now, secondhand from Renee, with no feeling in my chest one way or another. I went no contact with my parents and my brother. Not with a dramatic letter, not with a blow-up. I just stopped picking up, and after a while they stopped calling, and the quiet that came in behind them was the most peaceful thing I'd felt in years. I kept the people who showed up. Ernest comes for Sunday dinner and sits in Tom's chair. And I've made my peace with that because somebody good should sit there. Renee and I talk every week. Glenda's semi-retired, but still answers when I call with a freight question. Carver and daughter runs 5 trucks now. All of them deep green. All of them with 3 lumpy crayon trucks painted small on the doors where you'd only notice if you looked. People notice. Drivers ask about it at the truck stops. And I get to say her name out loud. Lily, my daughter. She drew that. And her name gets to live on the side of a truck rolling down every interstate Tom and I ever ran. I moved the little yellow boots. Finally, not far, just to a shelf where I can see them and still get out the door at 4. And on a Sunday this spring, almost a year out, I drove back to the lake at dawn with a fistful of wild daisies, the flat silver water, and no wind, and I left them on the bank for the 2 people who actually built me. The water didn't break me this time either. It just held still the way it does and held me with it. I don't reach for my phone out there anymore. There's nobody on it I'm waiting to hear from. I've got the people who came when there was nothing in it for them. And I let go of the ones who only showed up when there was. That's the whole trick, it turns out. That's the entire thing. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who show up when there's nothing left to gain. And the ones who walk away the moment there is. That's my story. A funeral they called trivial. A vacation they couldn't cancel. And 1 page they signed and forgot. If someone keeps asking you to carry them while they skip your hardest days, let this be your sign to set the page down. You don't owe a debt you never signed for. Share this with someone who needs it tonight. Tell me in the comments who actually showed up for you and hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.